When Marie-Louise Von Franz died in 1998, her New York Times obituary was titled, "A Jungian Legend is Dead." And to be honest, this is a valid reflection of Marie's life's work, and the fact that she's mostly associated with Carl Jung's ideas, although to purely think of Marie as a Jungian follower would be to underestimate her own work. But it is not unfair given that Marie, who was a very introverted person and consistently refused publicity, made two significant exceptions. She appeared in 2 films concerned with Carl Jung, A Matter of Heart and The Wisdom of the Dream. Also, she wrote a biography of Jung known to be one of the best summaries of his work. To reduce the work of Marie-Louise Von Franz to being purely derivative would be a mistake. But who was Marie-Louise Von Franz, and why is it that many who have heard of Carl Jung have not really heard of her? Marie was a brilliant thinker. She was born in Munich, Germany in 1915 to an Austrian father and a German mother, and when she was 3, her family moved to Switzerland. It is said that she showed impressive will and determination early on, and in primary school was so unwilling to go along with her religious education that a local priest insisted upon giving her private lessons, which ultimately led him to lose his faith altogether. Marie met Carl Jung when she was 18 in 1933. She was randomly invited along with 6 boys to meet Jung, and immediately she was fascinated by his work. He soon invited her to help him with Greek and Latin text translations because she was studying classical philology, and he in exchange was to teach her psychological analysis. Soon after, in 1935, she began work for which she remains renowned today, her interpretation of fairy tales, which will be the focus of this video. She worked tirelessly for 8 to 9 years to publish her research. By 1940, she had a PhD from University of Zurich, and in 1941 she began psychological analysis. Marie saw Jungian analysis as the natural continuation of the tradition of 2 people interacting together in analytical context. She was individualistic and cautious when dealing with her patients. For example, she saw the need for the patient to interpret his or her own dreams using their own previous associations and personally assigned meanings rather than relying on some sort of purely universal meaning system. She was also of the opinion that withdrawal into one's introverted realm is a method to open up to the unconscious, which can become one's friend when approached with an appropriate attitude. Nora Mendel, for whom Marie later on acted as a mentor and a friend, described her first meeting with Von Franz as striking. She wrote that Marie Von Franz was intense, down-to-earth, and somewhat eccentric. There was a powerful sense of brilliance, but most of all, a sensitivity and a living connection to a transcendental dimension of reality emanating from her that deeply moved me, although I could only struggle to grasp at its edges. I would say the most fascinating part of Marie's work is her interpretation of fairy tales. In her career, Marie-Louise Von Franz analyzed 863 fairy tales from many cultures and traditions. Why? Because it was her view that fairy tales and myths are the best platforms for a comparative study of human psyche, where we can really spot the basic patterns of how we work through cultural material. It's kind of like a place where all unconscious archetypes can be observed freely. She saw that fairy tales are stories that can appeal to all 4 functions of consciousness. They are seen through the lens of structure and motif connection by thinking types, through a lens of hierarchy of values for feeling types, as symbolic interpretations for sensing types, and as a cohesive, meaningful messages by intuitive types. Von Franz saw the study of fairy tales is important because it is in fairy tales where we find descriptions of general human proclivities. And so she approached the problem of their interpretation with insightful simplicity. She thought that interpretation of fairy tales was an art, one that you can get better at with sufficient experience. In general, however, fairy tales should be treated as other archetypical stories, meaning that they start with an exposition, that is, the time and place of events.
Once upon a time, in a far-off kingdom, there lay a small village at the edge of the woods.
Let us tell an old story anew, and we will see how well you know it. Once upon a time, there were 2 kingdoms that were the worst of neighbors.
Once upon a time, in a kingdom far, far away, and this tends to mean spaceless and timeless collective unconscious, Then, as a practitioner of the art of interpretation, you should notice the characters involved in any story. Ideally, you should count the number of people involved at the beginning and at the end of a fairy tale to see if there is a change. Then you define the key problem of a story, the issue at heart in any fairy tale, and proceed to the events, the adventures, the ups and downs of the storyline. Finally, any fairy tale ends with a climax or a sudden fadeaway that takes you back from this spaceless and timeless void back into reality.
Off with your head!
This pattern seems to be not too far away from the hero's journey described by Campbell, although if we look at the timeline of events, it seems that the work of Marie-Louise Von Franz precedes the work of Campbell. Marie had the key idea that any fairy tale should be interpreted in appreciation of the fact that there are a few main characters and motifs in all stories, for example, a hero, a shadow, an anima, and an animus.
The shadow can be our inferior side, our best enemy, so to speak, but can also just be our other side.
And it should be noted that most of those figures in fairy tales are rather abstract. They have very few personality traits and they appear mostly amorphous. In this context, Marie concluded that there are 4 primary archetypes: a daemonic father, a great mother, a daemonic shadow son, and a magical anima. How the hero faces interactions with these archetypical figures will ultimately determine his fate. Daemon refers to a lesser deity, a deity that can be helpful or harmful. In fairy tales, a hero or a heroine develops the ability to follow and trust their inner daemon, meaning their inner voice. These 4 characters are entities that the hero in any story will engage with. They are feminine and masculine, authority and non-authority figures. They can also be positive or negative, because ultimately they belong in the unconscious. So let's look at a daemonic father. A daemonic father is a parental archetype of authority. He is associated with the creative spiritual principle and the life-energizing dynamic in a story. The Great Mother is also a parental figure of authority. She represents a connection to life and nature and can be a positive or a negative symbol. It can be a person or a place, for example a city, and can be a destructive and frightful force or a giving and supportive character. A daemonic shadow son is a male archetype of the unconscious, the shadow, the emissary figure, and the task of a hero is to learn how to confront and hear the voice of this shadow against the prevailing popular opinion, because if the hero will oppose her inner voice, he or she will suffer tremendous misfortune. Finally, we have the magical anima daughter. This is a female figure of the soul. In emissary arc, the anima embodies the irrational and often unconscious feelings that give rise to illogical behaviors. But this is also a shadow figure with both friendly and threatening contents. So next time that you are watching a classic story, or perhaps a more dated Disney movie, try to see these 4 archetypes and how they interact with a hero. What are the results of these relationships, and what does that really mean?